She bought a broken mansion for almost nothing. In the attic, a safe waited, sealed for decades. Inside, $70 million and a confession. What she uncovered didn't just change her life. It rewrote someone else's sins. The county auction hall smelled like rain-soaked cardboard and decades of forgotten furniture. Emma Reeves sat in the back row, her daughter Lily pressed close against her side, coloring in a donated notebook with crayons worn down to nubs. Emma counted the bills again. $8,247. Every cent from selling her mother's wedding ring, the car she'd driven since college, and the last of what she'd called savings before it became survival money. The auctioneer's voice droned through lot after lot. Estate liquidations, foreclosures, properties no one wanted. Emma's hands were cold. She rubbed them together, feeling the absence of the ring that had circled her mother's finger for 30 years. 3 months since the funeral. 2 months since the eviction notice. 1 month since she'd realized that being a waitress in a town with 3 diners meant you were always one shift away from sleeping in your car. Next item, the auctioneer announced, his voice flattening with disinterest. The Ashford Estate on Blackwood Hill. Gothic Revival, circa 1902. 40 acres. Abandoned since 1983. Sold as is, structurally unsound. Possible environmental contamination. County assumes no liability. A murmur rippled through the sparse crowd. Emma looked up at the projection screen. The mansion filled the frame. Towering stone, peaked gables, windows boarded or shattered. Ivy strangled the walls like something trying to pull the house back into the earth. It looked less like a building and more like a ruin, already halfway to becoming a grave. Starting bid, $10,000. Silence. The auctioneer shifted his weight, glancing toward the county clerks seated at the side table. Emma's chest tightened. She'd researched this property for weeks, driving past it twice in the dark, too afraid to stop. 40 acres. A roof, even a broken one. A place no landlord could take away. Do I hear 10,000? Nothing. The room felt colder. Somewhere a radiator hissed. 8,000, the auctioneer said, his tone sharpening with impatience. Minimum bid, 8,000. Emma's hand moved before her mind caught up. She raised her auction paddle, the number 47 scrawled in marker across cheap cardboard. Her arm trembled. The auctioneer's gaze landed on her. 8,000 to number 47. Do I hear 9? Silence stretched. Emma felt eyes turning toward her. Curiosity, pity, something else she couldn't name. Going once, twice. The gavel cracked like a bone breaking. Sold to 47 for $8,000. Lily looked up from her drawing. Did we win something? Emma's throat was too tight to answer. She nodded. At the clerk's table, Emma signed paperwork with numb fingers. The pen felt heavier than it should. Title transfer. Liability waiver. Acknowledgement of structural concerns. The auctioneer leaned over her shoulder as she initialed the final page, his breath smelling of coffee and something medicinal. My grandfather worked for Victor Ashford, he said quietly. Kept the grounds before the place shut down. He told me once that house holds secrets that should have burned with it. He straightened, his expression unreadable. You sure you want this? Emma looked at Lily, who was tracing the mansion's outline on the back of her coloring page, her small tongue pressed between her teeth in concentration. I'm sure, Emma said, though her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Walking toward the parking lot, Emma heard voices behind her. 2 older men in work jackets standing near a pickup truck. Poor fool, one muttered. Doesn't know what she just bought. The other man turned, watching Emma with an expression that wasn't pity. It was fear. He looked away quickly when she met his eyes. Emma loaded Lily into the back seat of their borrowed Honda, her sister's car, grudgingly loaned for the week. The engine coughed twice before turning over. Emma sat with the deed in her lap, the paper already softening from the humidity in her hands. At the top, embossed in faded gold script, Ashford Estate, Blackwood Hill. Beneath it, a black and white photograph clipped to the documents. The mansion in its prime, tall and severe, its windows like eyes staring into the camera. "Mommy?" Lily's voice was small. "Is it haunted?" Emma forced herself to smile, tucking the deed into the glove compartment. "No, baby. It's just old." But as she pulled out of the parking lot, she glanced once more at the photograph. The windows weren't just dark, they were hollow, and the ivy climbing the stone didn't look like it was growing. It looked like it was holding on. The drive took 30 minutes, winding through farmland that gave way to forest. The road narrowed, pavement cracking into gravel. Blackwood Hill rose ahead, crowned with dense trees that swallowed the late afternoon light. The GPS lost signal 2 miles back. Emma followed the county map, turning onto an overgrown driveway marked only by a rusted iron gate hanging open on broken hinges. And there it was. The Ashford mansion stood at the top of the hill. Larger than the photograph suggested, more decayed than she'd imagined. The stone was dark with water damage and moss. Sections of roof had caved in. One of the chimneys had collapsed, leaving a pile of bricks scattered across the overgrown lawn. The boarded windows gave the house a blind, patient look, as if it had been waiting for someone to arrive. Emma turned off the engine. In the sudden silence she heard it, a faint creaking from somewhere above. Not wind, not settling, something rhythmic, deliberate. Lily pressed her face against the window. "It's really big." Emma opened the car door. The air smelled like wet leaves and something older, like stones that had been buried and dug up again. She walked toward the front entrance, her shoes crunching over broken slate. The double doors were oak, weathered to gray, their brass handles tarnished green. She touched the handle. It was cold, colder than the air. The door opened with a groan that echoed through the empty rooms beyond. Emma stepped inside, and the house exhaled. The foyer swallowed sound. Emma stepped deeper into the house, her footsteps muffled by decades of dust. Lily followed close behind, one hand gripping Emma's jacket, the other clutching her worn, stuffed rabbit. The air inside was colder than it should have been, damp and stale, carrying the faint metallic taste of rust. Above them, a chandelier hung from a single tarnished chain, its crystal drops clouded with grime. The marble floor beneath their feet was cracked in a spiderweb pattern, radiating outward from the center, as if something heavy had fallen there long ago. Wallpaper peeled from the walls in long strips, revealing water-stained plaster underneath. Everything looked like it had been left mid-collapse, caught in the act of dying. "It smells funny," Lily whispered. Emma nodded. It did, like wet newspapers, and something sharper, something she couldn't name. She pulled out her phone for light, but the battery was already down to 15%. She'd have to save it. From her backpack, she retrieved the 2 flashlights she'd bought at the hardware store that morning, handing the smaller one to Lily. "Stay close to me," Emma said. They moved through the ground floor slowly, Emma testing each floorboard before putting her full weight on it. The house was enormous. Room after room opened into more rooms, all of them stripped bare or filled with furniture rotting beneath sheets. In what must have been a dining hall, a long table still stood, its surface warped and splitting. Chairs lay toppled on their sides. A serving cart had been abandoned mid-roll, one wheel missing. In the east wing, they found the library. It was the only room that felt remotely intact. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, most of the spines too faded to read. A stone fireplace dominated the 4th wall, its mantel carved from dark granite. The floor here was wood, scuffed but solid. 2 windows, though cracked, still held glass. "We'll sleep here tonight," Emma said, setting down their bags. Lily looked around, her face pale in the flashlight beam. "Can we go home tomorrow?" Emma knelt, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. "This is home now, sweetheart. Just for a little while, until we figure things out." She didn't say what she was thinking, that there was no home to go back to, that her sister's patience had limits, that this broken mansion was the only thing standing between them and sleeping in a shelter. Instead, she smiled and unrolled the sleeping bags near the fireplace. While Lily colored by flashlight, Emma explored the library more thoroughly. The shelves held leather-bound volumes, most too damaged to open without them crumbling. She found a drawer in a writing desk near the window. Inside, yellowed newspapers, neatly folded. She spread them on the desk, angling her flashlight. The headlines hit her like cold water. "Railroad tycoon found dead in mansion. Ashford estate under investigation. Family refuses. Comment on allegations." The dates were all from late 1983. She scanned the articles. Allegations of fraud. Accusations that workers had disappeared under suspicious circumstances. References to a fortune that had never been accounted for. One article included a photograph of Victor Ashford standing in front of this very house, unsmiling, his eyes hard and distant. Emma looked up from the papers. Above the fireplace mantel hung a massive oil portrait she hadn't noticed in the dim light. The same man from the photograph, older, maybe in his 60s, wearing a black suit. His expression was severe, almost accusatory. His eyes seemed to follow her even as she moved. Carved into the stone mantel beneath the portrait, in letters worn smooth by time, were the words, "What we bury does not die." Emma's skin prickled. She turned away, folding the newspapers and tucking them back into the drawer. Lily had fallen asleep in her sleeping bag, the flashlight still on beside her, throwing long shadows across the walls. Emma checked the doors, both locked from the inside, though the wood was so warped she doubted they'd hold against much pressure. She added wood to the fireplace from a stack she'd found near the hearth, coaxing a small fire to life. The warmth felt fragile against the cold pressing in from the rest of the house. She lay down beside Lily, exhausted but unable to sleep. The fire crackled softly. Outside, wind moved through the trees, a low moan that made the window panes rattle. And then, from somewhere above, she heard it, the same rhythmic creaking she'd heard from the car. Slow, deliberate, like footsteps pacing across a floor. Emma held her breath, listening. The sound moved from one side of the ceiling to the other, then stopped. Silence stretched. She told herself it was just the house settling, old timber adjusting to temperature changes. But the sound had been too measured, too even. She looked up at the ceiling. Somewhere above this room, there had to be another floor. An attic, maybe, or servants' quarters. She hadn't seen stairs leading up when they'd explored, but this house was a labyrinth. There could be passages she'd missed. The creaking started again, fainter this time, farther away. Then it stopped. Emma stared into the darkness beyond the firelight. The house felt too large around them, too full of spaces she couldn't see. She thought about the portrait, the carved words, the newspaper articles about missing workers. She thought about the fear in the old man's eyes at the auction. "You sure you want this?" No. She wasn't sure, but certainty was a luxury she couldn't afford. She closed her eyes, forcing her breathing to slow. Beside her, Lily stirred, murmuring something in her sleep. Emma reached out, resting a hand on her daughter's shoulder. The warmth of her, the solidity, that was real. The rest was just a house, just wood and stone and years of neglect. But when she opened her eyes again, she saw it. A thin line of light beneath the library door, spilling in from the hallway, pale, flickering, as if someone were walking past with a candle. Emma sat up slowly. The light moved, passing out of view. She waited, heart pounding. Nothing. Only darkness beyond the door. She lay back down, pulling the sleeping bag tighter around herself. The fire was dying. The shadows grew longer. And somewhere in the walls, something settled with a sound like breathing. She didn't sleep that night. She only waited for morning. Morning came gray and cold. Emma woke stiff, her back aching from the hard floor. The fire had died to ash. Lily was still asleep, curled tight in her sleeping bag, her breath visible in the frigid air. Emma's phone was down to 8%. They needed supplies, food, batteries, candles. She couldn't afford to stay isolated in this house, not yet. She left Lily with a granola bar and strict instructions not to leave the library. Then she drove the 15 miles into Greymont, the nearest town. It was smaller than she'd expected. A single main street, lined with faded storefronts. Half of them shuttered. The hardware store sat at the far end, its sign hand-painted and peeling. Inside, the owner looked up from behind the counter. A man in his 60s with calloused hands and a face weathered by years of outdoor work. Emma grabbed what she needed. Batteries, a camping stove, rope, duct tape. When she brought everything to the register, she hesitated, then said, "I just moved into the Ashford place, on Blackwood Hill." The man's hands stilled. He didn't look at her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he rang up her items in silence, his jaw tight. When he handed her the receipt, his eyes finally met hers. Brief, guarded. "Good luck," he said flatly. At the grocery store, Emma loaded a cart with canned goods and bottled water. An older woman in a floral dress stared at Lily from across the aisle. When Emma met her gaze, the woman looked away quickly and hurried toward the exit, leaving her half-filled cart behind. Emma's unease deepened. She didn't understand the silence, the averted eyes. It wasn't just suspicion. It was fear. The library was a small brick building near the center of town. Inside, the air smelled like old paper and lemon polish. Emma settled Lily at a children's table with a stack of picture books, then moved to the reference section. She typed Victor Ashford into the computer catalog. Dozens of results appeared. Newspaper archives, municipal records, historical society documents. She printed everything she could afford and spread the pages across a reading table. The articles painted a portrait darker than the headlines had suggested. Ashford's railroad company had been plagued by labor strikes in the 1970s. Workers complained of unsafe conditions, long hours, disappearing wages. Several men had vanished, last seen entering Ashford's offices, never heard from again. The company claimed they'd quit without notice. Families filed missing persons reports that went nowhere. One photograph stopped her cold. Victor Ashford stood beside a younger man in work clothes, his foreman. The caption read, "Thomas Crane, 1978. Crane's face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. He looked like someone who'd seen something he couldn't unsee. Emma traced the image with her finger. There was something familiar in Crane's expression, recognition of a truth too heavy to carry. "You're living in that house." Emma looked up sharply. An elderly woman stood at the edge of the table, her hands trembling slightly. She was thin, her white hair pulled back in a bun, her eyes rheumy but sharp. Yes," Emma said carefully. The woman didn't ask permission. She sat down across from Emma and slid a folded newspaper clipping across the table. Emma unfolded it. "Thomas Crane, found dead in river. Ruled suicide, 1984. "People don't go looking for Ashford's money," the woman said, her voice low. "Those who do don't come back the same." Emma's throat tightened. "What money?" The librarian's eyes filled with tears. "My brother worked for Ashford. He tried to expose what happened, the unsafe conditions, the men who disappeared. They found him in the woods 6 months later. 'Heart attack,' they said." She leaned closer, gripping Emma's wrist with surprising strength. He was 32 years old, healthy, and terrified. Emma pulled her hand back gently. What was he afraid of? The same thing everyone who worked for Ashford was afraid of, that if they talked, they'd end up like Thomas Crane. Or worse. The woman stood, her chair scraping loudly. "Leave that house. Whatever's in there, it's not worth it." Emma watched her walk away, disappearing into the stacks. She looked down at the clipping, at Thomas Crane's face in the accompanying photograph. Hollow, haunted. What we bury does not die. She thought of the carved words above the fireplace, of the portrait's unblinking stare. The house wasn't just hiding decay, it was hiding guilt. On the drive back, Emma noticed the black sedan. It appeared in her rearview mirror about 5 miles outside town, keeping a steady distance. She slowed. It slowed. She sped up. It matched her pace. Her pulse quickened. She turned onto the overgrown drive leading to the mansion, gripping the steering wheel tight. The sedan slowed at the gate but didn't follow. Emma stopped the car and looked back. Through the trees, she could see it idling, a dark shape against the fading afternoon light. Then it drove away. Inside the library, Lily was sitting exactly where Emma had left her, drawing in her notebook. Emma knelt beside her, checking her face for signs of fear. "Did anything happen while I was gone?" Lily shook her head. "I heard noises upstairs again, like someone walking." Emma's chest tightened. "Probably just the wind." "It didn't sound like wind," Lily said quietly. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Emma stood in the center of the library and looked up at the ceiling. The house was too tall for just 2 floors. There had to be more. Attic spaces, servant quarters, something. She took her flashlight and left the library, moving through the darkened halls. The mansion felt different at night, larger, more aware. She found a narrow door she'd missed before, tucked beneath the main staircase. It was locked, but the wood was rotted. She pushed hard, and the frame splintered. Behind it, a steep, narrow staircase ascending into darkness. Cold air rushed down, carrying the faint smell of metal and something older. Dust, paper, time. Emma aimed her flashlight upward. The stairs ended at another door. This one closed. From somewhere above, she heard it again. The slow, deliberate creak of weight shifting across floorboards. Emma's hand tightened on the flashlight. She thought of the librarian's warnings, of Thomas Crane's hollow eyes, of the black sedans waiting at the gate. What we bury does not die. She placed her foot on the first step. The wood groaned beneath her weight. She climbed. Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in her sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic creak of footsteps directly above. Slow, deliberate, moving from one side of the attic to the other, then back again. The sound had a weight to it, a presence that made the air feel heavier. Beside her, Lily slept soundly, her breathing soft and even. Emma envied her that, the ability to close her eyes and let the world disappear. Enemy. But Emma's mind wouldn't quiet. She kept seeing Thomas Crane's hollow face, the librarian's trembling hands, the black sedan idling at the gate. Phew, what we bury does not die. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake Lily. The fire had burned down to embers, casting faint orange light across the room. Victor Ashford's portrait hung above the mantel, his eyes dark and unreadable. Emma looked away, pulled on her jacket, and grabbed her flashlight. The narrow staircase she'd found earlier waited beneath the main hall. She climbed carefully, testing each step before putting her weight on it. The wood groaned but held. At the top, the attic door loomed, thick oak, scarred and weathered. A rusted padlock hung from the latch. The wood around the frame was blackened, scorched, as if someone had tried to burn through it and failed. Emma pulled the crowbar from her belt and wedged it beneath the padlock's hasp. She leaned her weight into it. The metal screeched, then snapped. The padlock clattered to the floor, echoing down the stairwell. She paused, listening. The footsteps had stopped. Emma pushed the door open. It swung inward with a groan that sounded almost human. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of dust and something metallic. Old machinery, maybe, or rust. She stepped inside. The attic was enormous, stretching the full length of the house. Furniture stood in clusters, draped in sheets that had grayed with age. Boxes were stacked against the walls. Some collapsed, their contents spilled across the floor. Dust hung thick in the beam of her flashlight, swirling lazily. The air felt wrong, too cold, too still, as if the space had been sealed for decades and was only now exhaling. Emma moved deeper, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust. She passed a wardrobe with its doors hanging open, empty hangers, swaying slightly. A child's rocking horse, its paint peeled away. A mirror leaning against the wall, its surface so tarnished she couldn't see her reflection. In the far corner, she found a desk. It was mahogany, ornate, its surface covered in papers. Emma set down her flashlight and began sorting through them. Ledgers, contracts, handwritten notes in precise, slanted script. Victor Ashford's handwriting, she realized, matching the carved letters on the mantel. The ledgers detailed payments to workers, names, dates, amounts. But entire pages had been torn out, leaving ragged edges. Emma flipped through them, her pulse quickening. The missing pages all corresponded to the same time period. Late 1970s, early 1980s, the years the workers had disappeared. She found a loose note folded between two ledger pages. She unfolded it carefully. The paper was brittle, yellowed. Crane knows too much. Must be handled. Emma's hands went cold. She set the note down and stepped back, her breath coming faster. Thomas Crane, the man in the photograph, with the hollow eyes, the man who'd been found dead in the river. She turned, scanning the attic with her flashlight. The beam caught on something, a seam in the wall that didn't quite match. She moved closer, running her fingers along the edge. It was a panel, painted to blend with the plaster but poorly concealed. She pressed against it. It shifted. Emma pushed harder. The panel swung inward, revealing a hollow space behind the wall. And there, built into the brick, was a massive iron safe. It stood 6 feet tall, its surface dark and pitted with age. The door was engraved with letters worn smooth by time, but still legible. What we bury does not die. Emma's throat tightened. She reached out, touching the cold metal. 3 combination locks ran down the center of the door, their dials rusted but intact. She tried turning one. It resisted, frozen. Behind her, a sound, sharp, sudden, a door slamming. Emma spun, her flashlight sweeping the attic. Nothing moved. The shadows pressed in close, swallowing the edges of her vision. Then faint but clear, Lily's voice. "Mommy!" Emma's heart lurched. She ran, stumbling through the clutter, back toward the attic door. She descended the narrow stairs 2 at a time, her breath ragged. The library door was open. Lily stood in the center of the room, her face pale in the dying firelight, staring up at the portrait above the mantel. Emma dropped to her knees, pulling Lily into her arms. "Are you okay? What happened?" Lily's voice was small, frightened. That man was watching me. Emma looked up at the portrait. Victor Ashford's eyes seemed darker now, his expression harder. She felt the weight of his gaze, not just on her, but on everything. The house, the attic, the secrets buried in ledgers and locked behind iron doors. He looked angry, Lily whispered. Emma tightened her hold on her daughter, her mind racing. The safe, the missing ledger pages, Thomas Crane's note, the black sedan, the librarian's warning, those who do don't come back the same. She thought of her mother's voice, the last thing she'd said before the cancer took her. Don't let fear make your choices, Emma. Let love do that. Emma stood, lifting Lily into her arms. We're not going anywhere, she said quietly, more to herself than to her daughter. Not yet. She carried Lily to the sleeping bag and tucked her in, smoothing her hair. Then she sat beside the dying fire and stared at the portrait. Victor Ashford stared back, his face carved from shadow and judgment. Emma didn't look away. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the boarded windows. Somewhere above, in the attic, something settled with a low groan, wood or metal or memory. Emma closed her eyes and listened. The house was alive with secrets, and she was going to uncover every one. Emma waited until Lily was occupied, coloring at the library table, humming softly to herself before returning to the attic. The narrow staircase felt different in daylight, less threatening, but no less heavy. She climbed slowly, her breath visible in the cold air. The attic door stood open where she'd left it. Inside, morning light filtered through gaps in the roof, falling in pale shafts through the dust. The furniture looked less ominous now, more abandoned than sinister. But the safe, the massive iron safe built into the wall, seemed darker, more solid, as if it absorbed light rather than reflected it. Emma approached the desk where she'd found the ledgers the night before. She worked methodically, opening drawers, lifting papers, checking for false bottoms. In the third drawer down, her fingers found a seam. She pressed, and a hidden compartment popped open with a soft click. Inside lay a single envelope, sealed with wax that had cracked with age. Across the front, in handwriting that trembled, "To whoever finds this." Emma's hands shook as she broke the seal. The paper inside was yellowed, brittle. She unfolded it carefully and began to read. "I built my fortune on the backs of men I destroyed." The words hit her like cold water. She continued reading, her throat tightening with each line. Thomas Crane discovered I'd been falsifying safety reports to cut costs. 12 men died in a tunnel collapse I could have prevented. I told myself it was an accident. It wasn't. When Crane threatened to go to the authorities, I had him silenced. I watched them pull his body from the river and felt nothing. That was when I knew I was already dead. Emma's vision blurred. She blinked, forcing herself to focus. I hid the money I stole, $70 million in cash and bonds, in the safe in this attic. I thought I could live with what I'd done. I was wrong. The weight of it has crushed me. Every night I hear their voices. Every morning I wake to their faces. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. If you're reading this, you've found my sin. What you do with it will define you. The letter was signed, Victor Ashford, October 1983, 2 weeks before he died. Emma sat down hard on the dusty floor, the letter trembling in her hands. $70 million. The number felt impossible, too large to be real. She thought of Lily downstairs, of the eviction notice that had sent them here, of her mother's funeral expenses she still couldn't pay. 70 million could erase all of that. It could give Lily everything: college, security, a life without fear. But it was blood money, built on 12 men's corpses, on Thomas Crane's silence. Emma closed her eyes. She heard her mother's voice. Not a memory exactly, but a feeling pressed into words. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed. Choose carefully. Her mother had spent 30 years working factory jobs that broke her body inch by inch. Never complained, never asked for anything she hadn't earned. She'd taught Emma that integrity wasn't about what you did when people were watching. It was about what you did when no one would ever know. Emma opened her eyes and looked at the safe. 3 combination locks. She didn't have the numbers. But somewhere in this attic, in those ledgers and papers, Ashford might have left a way in. He'd wanted someone to find this. He'd wanted someone to make a choice he couldn't. She stood, folding the letter carefully and tucking it into her jacket pocket. She turned toward the safe, running her fingers along the engraved words. What we bury does not die. Her mother was buried. Thomas Crane was buried. 12 men were buried. But their deaths weren't finished. They lived on in this house, in this attic, in the weight of the iron door in front of her. If this story has made you think about what you'd do in her place, share it with someone who understands that the hardest choices are the ones that test who we really are. Emma turned away from the safe and descended the stairs. Her legs felt unsteady. When she reached the library, Lily looked up from her drawing. The picture showed the mansion in careful detail. The portrait above the fireplace, the attic door at the top of the stairs, and 2 small figures standing in front of it. One tall, one small. Are we going to stay here, Mommy? Lily asked. Emma sat down beside her, pulling her daughter close. I don't know yet, sweetheart. Lily leaned against her. The man in the painting looked sad now, not angry. Emma glanced up at the portrait. Victor Ashford's eyes stared back, dark and hollow. She'd thought they looked judgmental before. Now she wasn't sure. Maybe they were just empty. The eyes of someone who'd buried too much and been buried by it in return. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in her sleeping bag, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the letter. About the 12 men who died because Victor Ashford valued profit over lives. About Thomas Crane, who'd tried to speak up and been silenced for it. About the librarian's brother, who tried to expose the truth and died afraid. She thought about her mother, who'd never had $70 million, but had never needed blood on her hands to sleep at night either. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. Rain began to fall, drumming against the roof. Emma listened to it, letting the sound fill the silence. Somewhere above, in the attic, the safe waited. The money waited. Victor Ashford's confession waited. What you do with it will define you. Emma closed her eyes. She didn't know yet what she would do, but she knew she couldn't unknow what she'd found. The door had opened, and there was no closing it now. Emma woke to silence. Too much silence. The kind that pressed against her ears and made her hold her breath. She sat up slowly, scanning the library. Lily was still asleep, curled in her sleeping bag. The fire had gone out hours ago. Gray morning light filtered through the cracked windows. Something felt wrong. Emma pulled on her jacket and stepped into the foyer. The front door was still locked, but when she moved to the side window, she saw them. Fresh tire tracks in the mud outside, cutting deep grooves through the overgrown drive. Someone had been here, recently. She checked the other windows. The library window, the one she'd boarded up 2 days ago, had been pried open. The boards lay on the ground outside, nails bent. Emma's pulse quickened. She moved back into the library, her eyes sweeping the room. Nothing looked missing. But the papers on the desk had been moved. Someone had been inside, searching. Emma's hands went cold. The confession letter was still in her jacket pocket. She'd kept it on her through the night. But the attic, the safe. If someone knew. She woke Lily gently. told her to get dressed. "We're going on a little trip," Emma said, keeping her voice calm. 20 minutes later, she knocked on the door of a farmhouse, half a mile down the road. An older woman answered. "Mrs. Calloway," her mailbox had said. She looked at Emma with a mixture of suspicion and pity. "I'm staying at the Ashford place," Emma said quickly. "I need someone to watch my daughter for a few hours. I can pay." Mrs. Calloway's expression softened when she saw Lily. "No need. Come in, child." Emma knelt, kissing Lily's forehead. "Be good. I'll be back soon." "Why can't I come?" Lily asked, her voice small. "Because I don't know what's waiting for me there," Emma thought. "I just need to take care of some things, grown-up things." When Emma returned to the mansion, she knew immediately she wasn't alone. A silver Mercedes sat in the driveway, expensive, out of place. She parked beside it and stepped out slowly. The front door was open. Emma's breath caught. She moved inside, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. A man stood in the center of the foyer, hands in his pockets, studying the chandelier above. He was in his 50s, well dressed in a dark suit, his hair graying at the temples. When he turned, his eyes were pale and calculating. "Mrs. Reeves," he said, as if they'd met before. His voice was smooth, almost pleasant. "I'm Richard Vale, private acquisitions specialist." Emma didn't move. "You broke into my house. The door was open," he said with a faint smile. "I took the liberty of letting myself in. Hope you don't mind." "Get out." Vale didn't flinch. "I will. But first, I think we should talk about the safe." Emma's stomach dropped. She kept her face neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." Vale stepped closer, his expression sharpening. "Victor Ashford stole from a lot of people, Mrs. Reeves. That money doesn't belong to you. My clients have a legal claim. Open the safe, hand over the contents, and you'll be compensated fairly. Refuse, and things will get complicated." "How do you know about the safe?" Emma's voice was steadier than she felt. Vale smiled. Ashford wasn't as careful as he thought. People talk, records surface. My clients have been looking for that money for 40 years. And now you've found it for them. I haven't opened it. Not yet. Vale pulled a business card from his pocket and set it on the edge of the dusty table. "But you will. And when you do, call me. We can handle this cleanly. Professionally, or—" He paused, his smile thinning. "We can do it the other way." Emma didn't pick up the card. Vale turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps measured. At the threshold, he stopped and looked back. "You have 48 hours." After he left, Emma stood in the foyer, her breath coming fast. She picked up the business card. On the front, Richard Vale, Private Recovery Services. On the back, in neat handwriting, 48 hours. She called the police. The dispatcher sounded bored. Emma explained about the break-in, the man who'd threatened her. The dispatcher put her on hold. 10 minutes later, an officer came on the line. Ma'am, unless something was stolen or you were physically harmed, there's not much we can do. Did he threaten you directly?" "He said things would get complicated." "That's not a threat. That's a warning." The officer paused. "Listen, that mansion has a bad history. Maybe you should sell it and move on." Emma hung up. Her hands shook. She looked up at the ceiling, toward the attic. Someone knew. Someone had always known. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in the library, Lily beside, her staring at the ceiling. Outside, she heard engines, low, idling. She moved to the window and peered through the gap in the boards. 2 vehicles sat at the gate, headlights off. Dark shapes moved around them. Men, walking the perimeter, testing doors, checking windows. Emma's heart hammered. She grabbed Lily, shaking her awake. "We need to go downstairs. Now." "Why?" Lily's voice was thick with sleep. "Just come. Emma led her through the dark halls to the basement door. They descended the narrow stairs, Emma's flashlight beam bouncing off stone walls. The basement was cold, damp, filled with old furniture and shadows. Emma found a corner behind a stack of crates and pulled Lily close. Above them, footsteps moved across the floor. Slow, deliberate, searching. Emma held her breath. Lily pressed her face into Emma's chest. The footsteps stopped. Then after what felt like an eternity, they retreated. The front door closed. The engine started. The vehicles drove away. Emma didn't move for another hour. When she finally climbed back upstairs, the mansion felt different, violated, no longer a refuge. She stood in the library, looking up at Victor Ashford's portrait. His eyes stared back, hollow and accusing. What you do with it will define you. Emma pulled the confession letter from her pocket and read it again. $70 million. 12 dead men, Thomas Crane silenced. And now, 40 years later, people were still willing to kill for it. She thought of Lily, hiding in the basement, frightened. She thought of her mother, who died without ever asking for anything she hadn't earned. She thought of the men in the photograph, Thomas Crane's hollow eyes, the librarian's brother who died trying to speak. Emma folded the letter and looked at the safe's location above her, hidden in the attic. She didn't have the combination yet, but she would find it, not because she wanted the money, because she needed to know if she was strong enough to do what Victor Ashford couldn't. What we bury does not die. Emma closed her eyes. The house was silent around her, but the silence felt like waiting, like breath held before a fall. Emma returned to the attic at dawn, leaving Lily asleep in Mrs. Calloway's spare bedroom. The light was thin and gray, filtering through gaps in the roof. She spread Ashford's papers across the desk, ledgers, notes, the confession letter, and began searching for numbers. The combination had to be there, hidden in dates, in patterns, in the gilt Ashford had carved into every page. She started with the obvious. The year he died, 1983. She tried it on the first lock. Nothing. She tried his birth year from the library articles. Nothing. Her hands shook. 46 hours left. Then she saw it. A note in the margin of one of the ledgers, circled in fading ink. March 17th, 1978. The day everything collapsed. The tunnel collapse. 12 men dead. Emma turned the first dial, 03-117-78. The lock clicked open. Her breath caught. 1. Down. 2 more. She scanned the papers again. Thomas Crane's death. The newspaper clipping said May 3rd, 1984. She tried it on the second lock. 055-103-84. Another click. Emma's pulse hammered in her ears. The final lock. She thought of the confession letter. 12 men died. She tried. 12. The dial turned. The lock opened. For a moment, Emma just stared at the safe door. The engraved words stared back. What we bury does not die. She thought of her mother, buried 3 months now. She thought of the grief she'd pushed down, the shame of needing this broken mansion, the fear that she was failing Lily, the way her mother had quietly failed herself, working until there was nothing left to give. What we bury does not die. Emma pulled the safe door open. The smell hit her first. Old paper, metal, dust that had been sealed away for 40 years. Inside, stacks of bills filled the lower half, bound with rubber bands that had crumbled to black dust. Above them, bearer bonds in plastic sleeves. And at the top, a small wooden box. Emma lifted one stack of bills. The paper was aged, yellowed but intact. 50s and 100s. She set it down and pulled out another. And another. The sheer volume was overwhelming. Rows of cash stacked floor to ceiling. $70 million. More money than she could comprehend. She thought of Lily's torn shoes, the eviction notice, Her mother's funeral she'd paid for with a credit card she couldn't afford. All of it could disappear, erased. They could start over, safe, secure. Emma closed her eyes. Her hands trembled. Then she opened the wooden box. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, black and white, curling at the edges. Men in work clothes, standing in front of a tunnel entrance. Some were smiling. Some looked tired. All of them were alive. Emma turned the first photograph over. On the back, in Ashford's handwriting, James Kowalski, age 34, wife, 2 children. She turned over another, Miguel Santos, age 29, expecting first child. Another, David Chen, age 41, 3 daughters. 12 photographs, 12 names, 12 lives. Beneath the photographs was a ledger, different from the others. This one listed families. Next to each name, an amount, $400,000 for the Kowalskis, $625,000 for the Santos family, smaller amounts for men without dependents. The total, written at the bottom in Ashford's shaky script, $70,000. Compensation he'd calculated. Compensation he'd never paid. Emma sat down hard on the attic floor. The photographs spread around her like accusations. These men hadn't just died. They'd been erased. Their families left with nothing while Ashford lived in this mansion, surrounded by the money he owed them. She thought of Thomas Crane, who'd tried to speak up and been silenced. The librarian's brother, who'd tried to expose the truth and died terrified. All the people who'd been crushed under the weight of Ashford's greed. The money wasn't hers. It had never been Ashford's either. It belonged to these 12 families, or whoever was left of them. Emma heard footsteps on the attic stairs. She looked up. Lily stood in the doorway, her eyes wide. "Mommy, there are people outside again." Emma's stomach dropped. She moved to the attic window and peered through the gap. 2 cars sat at the gate, Vale's Mercedes and another sedan. Men stood beside them, waiting. 38 hours left. But they weren't going to wait. Emma looked at Lily, then at the photographs scattered across the floor. 12 faces. 12 families destroyed. She thought about what she would tell Lily years from now, how she would explain what she'd done in this moment. She could hand the money to Vale, walk away, keep Lily safe. Or she could do what Victor Ashford couldn't, what Thomas Crane had died trying to do. Emma knelt beside her daughter. "Sweetheart, I need you to go back to Mrs. Calloway's house. Can you do that for me?" "Are you coming?" "Soon, I promise." Emma kissed her forehead. "Go. Stay with her until I come get you." After Lily left, Emma stood alone in the attic, surrounded by $70 million and the faces of the dead. She pulled out her phone. 3% battery left. She dialed the number for the Greymont Library. The elderly librarian answered. "Yes?" "This is Emma Reeves. From the mansion. I need you to help me find some families." There was a long pause. "What families?" "The families of the men who died in 1978, the tunnel collapse. I found something. Something they should have had a long time ago." Another pause. When the librarian spoke again, her voice shook. "My brother's name was Samuel Ross. He tried—" "I know," Emma said softly. "I know what he tried to do, and I'm going to finish it." Emma hung up. She looked at the safe, at the money that had cost so much. Then she looked at Victor Ashford's portrait, visible through the attic floor opening. His hollow eyes stared up at her. What you do with it will define you. Emma began gathering the photographs, the ledger, the confession letter. She left the money where it was. Evidence. Proof. The truth Victor Ashford had been too weak to expose. Outside, car doors slammed. Footsteps approached the mansion. Emma descended the attic stairs. carrying the box of photographs. She stood in the foyer as the front door opened. Richard Vale stepped inside. His eyes found hers. "Mrs. Reeves, I hope you've made the right decision." Emma held up the wooden box. "I have." Richard Vale stood in the foyer, his expression unreadable. Emma held the wooden box against her chest, her heart hammering. "The safe," Vale said quietly. "You opened it." "I did." "Then you know what's at stake." He stepped closer. "My clients have been very patient, Mrs. Reeves. But patience has limits." Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. 2% battery. A text from the librarian. "Channel 7 News is on their way. Told them everything." Emma looked up at Vale. "So does Truth." His eyes narrowed. "What did you do?" "What Victor Ashford should have done 40 years ago." Vale's jaw tightened. "You have no idea what you've started." Neither did he. Emma set the box on the dusty table. "The confession letter, the photographs, the ledger, it's all documented. The families are going to know. Everyone's going to know." Vale's composure cracked. "You're making a mistake. My clients will—" "Your clients can explain to a judge why they think they have a claim to blood money." Emma's voice was steady now. "I'd be interested to hear that argument." Before Vale could respond, headlights swept across the foyer windows. A news van pulled into the driveway, followed by 2 police cars. Vale looked at Emma, his expression cold. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. Emma watched him drive away. Her hands were shaking. She sat down on the dusty stairs and waited for what came next. The story broke that evening. By morning, it was national news. Widow discovers $70 million and confession in abandoned mansion. Chooses justice over fortune. Emma's phone, now charged, rang constantly. Reporters, lawyers, historians. And then, slowly, the families. The librarian helped locate them, descendants of the 12 men who died in the tunnel collapse. Some lived nearby. Others had scattered across the country, carrying their grandfathers' names but not their stories. Emma met each of them in the mansion's library. She showed them the photographs, the ledger, the amounts Ashford had calculated but never paid. Some wept. Some stood in stunned silence. One woman, granddaughter of Miguel Santos, refused at first. "We don't need charity," she said, her voice tight. "This isn't charity," Emma said quietly. "It's what was always yours, what he stole from your family." The woman looked at the photograph of her grandfather, young, smiling, unaware of what was coming. Her shoulders sagged. "He never got to meet me," she whispered. Emma nodded. "I know." Richard Vale's clients threatened the lawsuits, but public pressure and legal precedent for historical restitution worked in Emma's favor. The state attorney's office opened an investigation. The mansion itself became part of the settlement, transformed into a memorial, dedicated to the 12 men and the cost of unchecked greed. 6 months later, Emma stood in what had once been the library. The room was unrecognizable. The walls had been cleaned, the floors restored. Sunlight poured through the new windows. Children's laughter echoed from the community center next door. The mansion breathed again. Victor Ashford's portrait had been moved to the memorial room, surrounded by photographs of the 12 men. Their names were engraved on a plaque below, in memory of those whose voices were silenced. Lily stood beside Emma, holding her hand. "Do you think he's sorry now?" she asked, looking up at Ashford's painted face. Emma knelt beside her daughter. "I think he wrote that letter, hoping someone would finish what he couldn't. Maybe that's his sorry." Lily considered this. "Did we finish it?" "We started it," Emma said. "The rest is up to them." She nodded toward the families gathered in the next room. descendants sharing stories, piecing together histories that had been buried for too long. As evening fell, Emma walked through the mansion one last time before the ceremony. The rooms were filled with voices now, historians, students, family members. The house no longer felt haunted. The silence had been replaced by something warmer: memory, witness, truth. She stepped outside onto the front steps. The ivy had been cleared from the stone. The windows no longer gaped like hollow eyes. The mansion stood solid, transformed from tomb to testament. Emma looked back at the house, at the light spilling from its windows into the gathering dusk. She thought of Victor Ashford, of Thomas Crane, of the 12 men whose faces she'd memorized. She thought of her mother, buried 3 months before she'd bought this place for $8,000, and a prayer: "What we bury does not die." The phrase came to her one last time, but it felt different now, lighter. What they'd buried: Ashford's crime, the workers' stories, her own grief, had been brought into light. And in that exposure, it had finally been given permission to rest. Lily appeared beside her, tugging her sleeve. "Can we go home now?" Emma smiled. They had a small apartment in town now, nothing fancy, but clean and warm. The restitution process had brought consulting work, enough to live on. Not comfort, not wealth, but enough. Honest work for honest pay. "Yes, sweetheart, let's go home." They walked down the steps together, hand in hand, toward the car parked in the driveway where tire tracks had once threatened. Behind them, the mansion stood in the fading light, no longer broken, no longer silent. Just a house with a story that had finally been told. Emma didn't look back again. She didn't need to. What had been buried was finally at rest, and so was she. Some inheritances come wrapped in iron and silence, promising salvation, but delivering only weight. Emma had bought a mansion for survival, and found instead a reckoning, not with Victor Ashford's ghost, but with the choice every desperate heart faces, whether to bury truth deeper or bring it into light. The safe had held 70 million reasons to stay quiet, but it also held 12 faces, 12 names, 12 families, who'd waited 40 years for someone brave enough to say their grief mattered more than fortune. In the end, what we bury does not die. It only waits, patient and heavy, for hands willing to unearth it. Emma walked away from the mansion, not richer, but whole, and the house, no longer choking on secrets, finally exhaled.